I had a very strong sense the whole time I was there that I was partially responsible for something so much bigger than me. When something went wrong, yeah, I guess that's why I use the word haunted, because I still, things that went wrong, like I still, there's still heavy things to think about for me, for sure.
Hi, I'm so pleased. Um, I'm so happy to welcome you all to the first concert that we're holding in this new space. Um, the Artel, a artist studio and accommodations. This is an exciting space full of a lot of potential. Um, it's a gallery, as you can see. It's a set of studios. It's an event space. Um, and I think you'll be seeing a lot of it over the next number of years. There's 6 people who live here, and they're wonderful. They're artists of different kinds, and they're going to be very active in the community. Our goal is to bring contemporary culture to the downtown area.
The artist-run culture that Modern Fuel was aiming at was to bring artists into Kingston and present, as well as present alongside local artists. But as is the case with a lot of artist-run, we were programming a year to 2 years ahead. And so it became very apparent to me that the local emerging artist community who was coming in, and I was around 26 at the time, and so we were peers. They were coming into the center and being like, hey, this is great, can I be a part of this? And I was like, yes, got to apply, there's a whole process, and it'll be like a year and a half to 2 years from now. And that became an obvious barrier.
You're further marginalizing those local artists, which was kind of the goal of the Artel in the first place, was to get local artists to show their work, because it was very difficult in Kingston to get that to happen, apart from maybe the single Modern Fuel show that was, juried by whoever guest juror every year, and that was it.
My role being the connector to the organizational body that was legally responsible, and being really cool about it. I have to say, at the beginning, they were like, okay, like very hands off. But there was a strain there as well, in terms of my ability to be an equal partner and not, in any way, shape, or form, an authority, which ended up kind of happening, I think, as some political strife ended up happening within the collective later on. Also led to a great deal of investment, a lot of personal investment. A lot of people became very tied to and felt very strongly about their role in this group. So it had that positive consequence as well.
There was always a push and pull. I don't think we ever came to real decision, so-and-so will get this title, so-and-so will get that title, because as far as I remember, the vast majority of the people involved were against giving titles to individuals or attributing this accomplishment to that person and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of pushback to do that by certain folks who had strong opinion. That was the biggest challenge to the positivity that the Artel, brought to my life and my community at the time. Didn't come to a resolution, but the tension was sort of ever present throughout those years.
I think when it comes back to who took credit and that kind of stuff, I think that there was a lot of people who wanted to really push to make it into something at the end of the day. And then some people were more like, well, if this is the consensus and the consensus is we only want to do this, then why are we pushing it any further? You know what I mean? So that was kind of my take on that thing. And there was always conflict, I guess.
There is a crazy pressure in the way that arts are practiced nowadays to continue to grow your project. And you get in huge trouble if you can't. If you can't keep going back to the people who are giving you funding and saying, like, look, it's had this level of success. That often makes a thing, a couple of years after you started a project, it no longer serves any purpose that you had for it. And I think at that point, like, you should not be afraid to shut it down or walk away. And I think if the Artel stopped serving a meaningful purpose in Kingston, then, like, who cares? Burn it to the ground or something.
There were great difficulties in passing on that history. I wasn't always the most adept at the politics of collaborative work. It became very difficult to have productive, agreed upon written histories or policies that were organic, that everyone sort of were built with flexibility in mind. It was very difficult to do so. So in a lot of ways, I ended up writing a lot of them and then showing people for approvals. And those approvals were given, but it was still, again, this, like, everything sort of was being funneled through me. Looking back, I know I was very anxious around that role because it was one that I didn't want. I didn't want to be in charge.
It rounds it out a little bit more. It says, like, this project is more than just people living here. There's a gallery of it. Like, I think this should have a name because it will function completely differently than how the rest of this house goes. This is like the business and that's the living. Those two are separate.
But it seems like there are places like that already in a way, like museums, certain museums, people live like upstairs or whatever. And it's kind of formal in my kind of view. I thought it'd be kind of nice to have it not separated. Yeah, and I think it's also more welcoming. And we do walk around in this room as well, like when we do live here.
I guess this is your living room.
It kind of is as well. And we have concerts and stuff, so it's not really a gallery.
So do we want to actually have two different names, or just have gallery and?
Well, I don't think it's actually two names, because I think what you brought up, Lisa, about like a different space. I think it's considered a different space within the same sort of organization.
Everybody seemed really obsessed with the legacy of the Artel, and there were people in the camp who wanted everybody to have credit for bringing the Artel together, because lots of us felt very passionately that it was a community enterprise and everything should be reached by consensus, and that's what was special about the Artel. And then others who felt differently, who felt that people should be, certain people or whatever the case might be, should be given credit for founding the Artel and that sort of thing.
There was never like a mandate or something that was written down to pass on from generation to generation of the Artel people. And it never, so things got lost and maybe the purpose of the space got lost and those kind of things. And I would have liked to see it kind of sustain something that was more arts driven, obviously in terms of visual arts.
Different histories were lost, different groups of names were kind of just, I don't even know. That's where it enters into a gray zone for me. I don't know what happened and why so much of that information was never passed along or held in any kind of import. It sort of felt like with every new iteration, there was an attempt to dispose of what had come before. And we're going to do it differently this way, and this is how we're going to fix, because nothing's ever perfect, and that was the thing that that really came out of Artel.
I don't regret that it was not in line with maybe the ideas of people who came before us, and I feel fully committed to the idea that no one owns the Artel and that it reinvents itself, and that when I and others left, the narrative changed a lot. The moment that I walked out of the door, or the moment that I left the collective, I truly didn't care if it continued to reflect the values that I worked hard on while I was there. And I loved the idea that it is always going to be defined by like the people that live there or are part of the collective. I was I am extremely proud of what I did there, but I was also excited by the idea that maybe like the record of what I did would be wiped away rather quickly, because I love that impulse of just destroy it and start it again.
Kingston's kind of dominated by a few families that own a lot of the properties, and Matt Abramsky, part of the Abramsky family, he had just been to Soho, he told me, and he'd seen what could happen when artists and realtors work together. He took me on a tour with a couple of other friends I brought along, and one of the buildings he took me to was the one on Sydenham Street. It was rough, it needed some work, but as I remember, as I was climbing the stairs to go to the second floor, I was like, hey, how about this idea? And I remembered this idea of like a place for artists. I think at its height, there were like 22 members of the core collective, where the original kind of idea was to have 6 tenants and 5 community members max. More people from the community just kept wanting to be involved. And then in February 2006, at Modern Fuel, we had the first ever meeting of the collective. And that was where the original concept became a collective concept.
Through a mutual friend, I had heard about the opportunity of living in an artists cooperative, running a gallery cooperatively with the tenants. So I was living there for the first 4 months that it was up and operational, and then was part of the arts collective, I'm not sure, maybe for a year and a half after that. And I worked as the administrative director of Modern Fuel Artist Run Center for about a year and a half after that. So then I was also peripherally involved in that capacity.
I wanted to say on behalf of Jeremy, because I know he won't say it himself, what might be nice, I know that he has no money as well and is also looking for a space to exhibit in, and just to keep in the back of your head, whatever he didn't want me to bring up, but thinking about that if, whatever.
I was involved because my now wife, then girlfriend, had moved in, Jessica Ravito. I was the one who actually physically painted the gallery and did all that stuff, so refurbished it, so I had a good connection with that place.
My friend Steph was going to this cool new place, well, not new, but new to me, called the Artel, which actually had a crowd that didn't kind of judge me for my weird way of dressing, which was actually a lot more flamboyant back then than it is now. You know, also my friend Eric Zuring lived there as well, and I made friends with a guy named Aiden who does music production, which I was really into. And that was really cool because we could jam there. It was really like more about going there and doing something, like recording something, than it was about I guess, you know, seeing other people's work. Really, I think it was kind of always just a collaborative place where we could, you know, hang out.
It was my first time like really being involved in a community space and like seeing what that looked like, and I was 17 at the time. Spent a lot of time there. It was like a really important part of my teenage years.
So I came to Kingston about 4 years ago, and I've always really been interested in the art scene. I've just been an artsy person like forever, and the one thing I was really interested in was learning how to like write poetry and becoming a bigger spoken word artist than I was. And so I saw the Artel was doing a few spoken word things here and there, and I met some of the members, and then I heard about the Artel, and then here I am.
This was a great opportunity for local artists that were completely disenfranchised from any kind of institutionalized art, or even from like schooling or anything like that. There was tons and tons of talented artists who didn't have any concept of writing a grant or putting towards even like a CV or anything that would go towards a gallery that would get them in, but they were good, they were really good. And when it was so much easier for that space to be like, yeah, we'll give you a show. And like the concept of giving like a 17-year-old kid at a high school a full gallery space is kind of like an amazing thing that's never gonna happen ever for a lot of people.
The side of things that became difficult later was the side where art meets policy and legality and business and money. And the Keystone side of it, it was never not business, I think, for them.
When they were feeling nice one time, they had an empty storefront on Princess Street, and they're just like, if you guys got some ideas, you can use it. And we made this kind of fake empty store, and we wrote this ridiculous, like, kind of message that was like a bunch of kind of consumer jargon, and kind of created a laminated stenciled sign and put it on the storefront window. And so it was right on the main drag, this empty store, with this very strange paragraph about shop in here but don't shop in here kind of thing. People just could not figure out what it was or what that space was supposed to be, and they wanted it to be this place where they could go in and buy something, or like just like they wanted to know what kind of store it was. Those ideas couldn't really settle for people. There wasn't enough there. I guess another reason that it was very important to me is that we liked the idea that authorship and like ascribing like personal credit to people was not important. What's important is that like ideas appear.
The momentum that was so exciting at that beginning of basically the idea first emerging in November, the first meeting happening in February, and the doors opening at the Artel in May 2006 is extremely fast-paced. And in that period, the idealism that had, and not naive, but just the excitement and the possibility of what we could do together, the energy really propelled us and really pulled us all together. But the questions of how the hell are we going to do this? Who does what? Who pays for things?
For a thing like that to be very productive, you have to be someone who has something to give, has excess energy. At any given time, the collective was made up of people who were able to do a lot of work on its behalf, and people that actually sort of needed the help of the collective or the resources of the collective to get themselves back on track. While I accept that, I also felt like there were times where we weren't able to accomplish things because of too great a number of the membership was disempowered in one way or another.
I think there was always a frustration in terms of just people putting in the time, because if you were a tenant, you were, it was kind of mandated that you were going to have to participate and have to deal with it just because it was your house, basically. If people aren't into it, people don't do it. It's not sustainable because people don't want to sit in the gallery, they don't want to run shows, they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that, and it just kind of turns into a communal house with an event space in the bottom.
If we had to allocate resources toward the well-being of the people that live there, we were compromising our ability to support art and artists. And I am someone who likes to think about, anything that we've done, I'm like, how could we have done that better? And yeah, I think some of the tougher things, especially where getting something done was pitted against the potential distress that somebody might have been experiencing, we have a mixed record in how we dealt with those things, for sure.
There were some community members who were already strongly entrenched in the arts community in Kingston and knew what they wanted the Artel to be, had worked together at Modern Fuel and beyond.
For the sake of wanting to make a living and pay myself, I ended up working within arts organizations. I still make work. For 12 years, it hasn't been my focus. Maybe I lack the discipline required, but I love working within the arts and working in support of artists. But I've also come to understand that it can be, in and of itself, a practice. And Artel was a part of that. Mm-hmm. For me, I understood it as an arts project, and my role within it, and everyone's role within it, was as artists, and that what we were doing in creating a space for presentation of art was art in and of itself, or had a capacity to be. sort of a performative role. And I understood that to be the case, but I don't think everyone agreed. In the years since leaving Artel, when I've re-engaged with it at different points, I found that who I was to the history was, I was told this, I was a glorified administrator. That's all I had been. I hadn't been an artist in that context. But in my heart, my reason for wanting to be a part of it and wanting to devote, it was all volunteer, of course, for everyone involved, was because it was so dear to my heart as a social art form.
We did have an incident while I was there where one of the people who originally started the project, one of the founding members, got in touch and asked if they could be listed on the website as the creator of the Artel. And I felt very strongly at the time that the Artel drew a lot of its power from ideas, from collectivity, from anonymity, from anti-professionalism. And the majority of us agreed at that time, and we did not accept this person's proposal.
I don't know that I would have pushed towards anonymizing the Artel as much as I did, because in the end, I don't know that it matters. The Artel taught me the most about community that I've ever been taught, and it was a great lived experience in community. And what does it matter if somebody wanted attribution more than somebody else at this point?
So, so that has been a huge part of the difficulty, the pain, I guess, of Artel for me was that the role that that everyone had played together to make it happen, and the role that I'd played at the very beginning to set up the pieces so that we could do this together, that seemed as though it was very much, there was an attempt to kind of rewrite or change history. I think that there are different ways of organizing within a collective model that would certainly mitigate or deal with the ways that people are, and the ways we engage with, I keep talking about power, but it's a really
which I think is sort of what people spoke to in terms of like not wanting to differentiate between the purpose for this gallery and the purpose for the studio spaces.
Yeah. I think it is a really interesting point that it is just going to name itself something gallery no matter what happens. Okay, at this point, could we do a revote on one name or two names, see if anyone's changed their mind based on what we've just talked about? And we'll leave it. Sure. Okay. Everyone, one name, hand. Mm-hmm. 1, 2, 3.
There are lots of moments where it felt so gratifying the way that we were able to work together, but there were also lots of moments where I learned about like an unpleasant power I might have to shut down an idea or to take up a lot of space in an environment like that, which is very valuable for me to keep in mind as I kind of continue to take part in complex projects like that.
A-R-K, arc.
Look at Ben's satisfied face.
Fine.
The symbol of an ark is, although biblical, is appropriate.
We were waiting for the flood that we're like what?
Well, that we're gathering all of the stray artists, we're preserving them.
Like I feel like choosing the name was a little bit encapsulated like the struggles of the Artel, right? Like there were individuals super pushing their own agenda. Everybody debated for days and days. Anyways, and then Irina just said, "Oh, the Artel," and it meant it was some sort of Russian collective. Like I even forget what the Artel means.
Yeah.
Found one. What? I don't know how to say it. Artel.
What's it? What is it?
Artel.
Hey!
Is this it here?
Yeah.
Artel!
Is it, do you want, did you read it? Did you read it?
A-R-T-E-L?
It means a cooperative
A-R-T-E-L?
association of craftsmen living and working together.
Artist run, like what we were doing at Artel was very much similar to what artist run centers in Canada began as. They began, most of them, a lot of them, began as collectives. And some of them, you know, immediately hired an administrator to do all of that menial stuff, and then they made decisions about the less practical matters, the stuff that was, you know, maybe more interesting or exciting for them. And a lot of them became institutional, and I think we were hoping not to. And they succeeded. The Artel succeeded in not being an institution, right? We are all a part of not allowing that to be a safe space for collaboration.
Decision. Okay, because honestly, like I think people who care have made it clear. Who care? Okay.
Okay, should we make a list? Did you
All right.
compile a list?
I did
You
not
have a list?
compile
Here, I'll
list.
read them out aloud.
I did not.
Jen's got it.
No, I do not have a list. I have no list.
Does anyone have a list?
Yes. I know.
Okay, and how many minutes do we give ourselves to deal with this? 5, like 3 minutes? Like we turn into like the speed name thing?
Yeah. I don't know. 15 minutes.
Could I write mine down?
I would like to think that things can happen totally grassroots and on their own and be sustainable. But my personal experience in a lot of initiatives that started out like that was that there are lots of challenges for them to sustain themselves. So because of those experiences, I now have changed my mind and feel that institutionalization, for better or for worse, is necessary for the long-term sustainability of collectives and organizations.
About 18 months in, there were a couple people in the collective at the time that decided that they didn't want me to be in the collective anymore. And in part that was a result of, well, we didn't talk to each other about it. Like I was saying, there were some meetings where I just couldn't mitigate the pressures I was feeling to have everything running in a smooth way because of the implications that would have on other things, and would sort of be too dominant in the meeting. And the way that got brought up at that time, in whenever that was, 2007, was not through a, hey, you should maybe not do this anymore. It was a coup, in a sense, like, we want you out, a couple of the people in the group. But the rest of the people in the group didn't agree. And so instead, those people left, and I stayed. When the Artel announced that it was being kicked out of its house, a couple people from the Kingston community contacted me to ask my advice, to ask for what I thought, asked me to participate and help in some way. And they weren't collective members. They were people that had been part of the Artel activities for years and years and years, and really cared about the space. And so they reached out to me, and so I would then step back in and I would engage. And I never felt welcomed by the Artel itself, but people that had otherwise enjoyed the Artel and meant a lot to them for other reasons. But I'm hoping that as years go by, and maybe some of the hotness of the conflict becomes a little bit less white hot, and people who otherwise don't believe that they have anything in common can actually have a conversation or learn something different about each other.
I definitely feel that it's more inclusive. I feel like it's also been really difficult to restore our reputation, because a lot of people don't want to take the chance again to come into a place and kind of feel that they're being judged for everything they say. the good thing is that we've been able to reach out to a crowd that we've actually never had before.
Yeah, it's been a lot better because I think we've all kind of experienced that, and we can all recognize kind of problematic behavior and manipulation and power trips, and now we're at this point where we're just like, we're really gonna talk things out and like understand each other. And
A lot of these spaces now have closed in the downtown of Kingston. I mean, I was telling you earlier, the Artel is no longer in its location. The Sleepless Goat recently, which is another workers' cooperative. I've been to Kingston once since it's closed, and I walked down Princess Street and I was like, I don't actually have a destination. I don't have anywhere to go.
Well, I think it's a big hit for that community of people who aren't involved with Queens, because now that Modern Fuel is basically in a roundabout way involved with the Queens campus, it's further kind of disenfranchised them from any kind of gallery space. Sleepless Goat was, as much as it was a cafe, it was also a great gallery space for people to show work, and it was the same kind of process of getting involved. It was basically just putting your name in, and people would put you on a list, and yay or nay, you'd be in, and they'd put you on a list, and you'd go in and do it.
for me, when I moved here in high school, the Goat was a huge place for me. 205 Sydenham was a huge place for me. My friend's apartment, that the landlords just sold the apartment, and she had to close that space. That was a huge place for me. Like all these, and they all overlap. Like it's all the same kind of community members that run them. So it's hard to see them go.
Kingston is not always going to be lucky enough to have people there that are like, I'm just going to like try to make culture take hold here, no matter what. Culture that feels vital, culture that's not conditional upon some sort of middle-class economy.
I don't know, I'm not tight with my family, and I don't really have family per se. So like here, like we're just such a tight group of people, and we care so much about each other, and we support each other's art and our lives. So it's just, yeah, they're like my family. I'd say they're Artel's family. In the community, I'd say we foster art and like make Kingston a better place art-wise, because a lot of the art, I mean, it does come from other places, but the Artel is a big part of that too. So
I love the people that I've met through the Artel, and not all of them based on what I've told you from before, but I feel like I always make really good family members here, and you always like just like strong ties to the community. It makes you feel like you're really a part of something, and like, I don't know, I love that.
Today is the Skeleton Park Arts Festival in Kingston, which is a kind of interesting thing that during my time there grew from like some people playing in their own bands in the park to like a thing that is kind of fairly well funded now that A-list kind of Canadian industry bands play. And they kind of had this tweet of like thanking like the kind of Canadian Heritage Foundation and Tourism Kingston for funding the event, and you know, this like, we couldn't have done it without you, you know. We want something to happen, but it has to be in this way that it's a commercial success, and some corporate synergy has occurred.
The thing that sticks in my mind most was that sense of community that I had and that we all had, or I felt we all had at that time, that wouldn't have been there if we hadn't have been involved with the Artel. And I see that sense of community having shifted into different spaces in Kingston. It's kind of cheesy, but I feel like there's a bit of that with the Skeleton Park Music Festival as an example. Totally different, but there were some key players in that who were key players in the Artel.
I think it's really important to have safe spaces, creative spaces, like pay what you can spaces, like local, like sort of run, you know, it's tough, but it's, I don't know, when you see like the work, when you see like the end result, the effort you put in, it's rewarding.
Setting up some shows was like an empowering experience for me. I realized that it doesn't take much to do that. It just takes like a lot of kind of enthusiasm.
Yeah, you see it flourish now. In terms of how many people that we know that have kind of come out, that have gotten quite successful, that first had Artel shows, you look at Cameron Topsett and Lindsay Fisher, and those people who are very, I don't want to say successful, but they produced fantastic work. And you would hope that that was because of some kind of confidence building going through and being able to put it in a community that wasn't as judgmental, that everybody knew.
Being here, being able to talk about it, gives me that sense of optimism that as we can maybe start to share a little bit more about our experiences and see where we may have some perceptions that can shift, I guess. There's a lot more in common than we might think, and I want to celebrate Artel. I've kind of wanted to celebrate Artel for a long time, you know, like, and now, I don't know, the weird thing that can happen with history is you can like memorialize and mythologize something. So I'm not super down with that, but I do want to think about what was good about it and what is good about the fact that it remains in a new form, you know. What does that mean? And connect that to everyone that has contributed to it over its lifetime, and not continue to just isolate into little pockets and exclude, you know. So it's good to talk about, but it's hard to talk about.